Hello and welcome to the Practical Leadership Podcast, where leaders share their tools and practical advice to make you a better leader today. I'm your host, Max Kozlowski, and today I have quite the guest. He is an advisor, a board member, and a manager director of the Geekdom Fund. He is a thoughtful listener. He's a type of person that when he talks, other people listen, and not only because he controls the flow of money, but because he's got great insight, great advice. He knows what it takes to make business work. And we're just so happy to have you here on the podcast today. Mike Troy, everyone. Mike, glad you're here.
Thanks, Max.
So Mike, to kind of get us started today, what's something good that's been happening in your world over the last few days, weeks, or months?
Well, I guess, the last few months, obviously you mentioned I'm a managing director at the Geekdom Fund. So we've run an early stage venture capital fund. So we've had some big news from some of our portfolio companies, couple of new unicorns in the portfolio, a company up in Austin called Zen Business, raised a pretty significant round of financing, pretty recently, led by Oak HCFT. And the newest news just announced last week is we have another company up in Austin, a portfolio company that is raising a pretty significant round, being led by Vista Equity Partners. That company is called Flash. So pretty exciting news on the business front over the last few months.
That is awesome. So one of the things that at the end of the day, the success of what you do is reflected on the growth of these organizations, and that growth, the success is in what it does for the economy, what it does in job creation, what it does in making people's lives better. And we all have to recognize that they all started somewhere, and at some point they needed some funding, and you had a say in all of that. So that's kind of why we're so lucky here to have you today. So when we think about kind of like leadership, it takes leadership to bring these companies up, right, and to grow them up and to get them to become what ultimately is everyone's goals. So for those of you that might not know, a unicorn is like a company that's getting up there into $1 billion type valuation, and it doesn't happen by accident. So when it comes to leadership in these companies, in these teams that you guys decide to invest in, what do you notice? Like what do you see in the people driving them that makes you feel like you might have a winner in your hands?
Yeah, look, I think for most investors, one of the key criteria is to have a great team. We invest in sort of the early stage, so that doesn't necessarily mean a big team. And sometimes the founders have had a tremendous amount of experience in their past, and they're used to leading big teams. Other times we're dealing with founders that this is sort of their real first role as a CEO and as a leader. Maiden voyage. And so I think, having, obviously, we're looking for something that's sort of like an inspiring vision for the company, something that makes it easy to get people behind. The success of these companies is largely dependent not just upon what the initial team does, but also bringing on, adding to that team so that as sort of the company gets bigger, as the milestones and goals get bigger, they're not going to do this alone. So it's really, having somebody that can, not only lead a team, but also grow a team is really critical, because, the one thing that most of the companies that we see that are extremely successful or just sort of outliers even within our own portfolio is they've just got incredible teams that come together over time. So they've got, real leaders in sort of all the key positions of the company.
So one of the things that I'm understanding is, you're going to invest in a team that has an inspiring vision and has a strong team, but there's someone behind that team that has made it kind of come together and work well, has brought in, experts in their fields. Are there some things about these people that you recognize, that you can tell, like, hey, this person, no, I mean, not only does he have a good track record of being good at what he did, but it's because of this that I think he has the ability to kind of get people around them?
Yeah, look, I think, one of the main things is, you need someone that is ultimately confident enough to bring in people that are, potentially smarter than they are. Like that can't be, somebody that needs to be the smartest person in the room is typically not going to hire as well as somebody that, their goal is not to be the smartest person in the room, right? It's to hire enough great people around them that, or in a given, in a given area, maybe it's sales or marketing or product design or, something technical, that, like, somebody that can almost teach them something in those different areas.
How do you evaluate for confidence, right? Because I agree. I think that, confidence not necessarily in their ability, but kind of like confidence in the outcome is something that sometimes comes to mind in what I see with entrepreneurs. But I'm curious about how you see it, right? Because you guys get pitched a lot, I'm guessing, right? Like people come and talk to you about what they have and are presenting a bright future, and you've got to evaluate where to put the money and where you're not. And one of the things you're looking at as a team, you're looking at the leader. What do you look at, right? Because I think our audience is going to be comprised of people that are going to want to grow up to be able to go pitch you and get some funding, and some that might already have funding, and they might want to know what they might be missing. And I'm super curious. What are some telltale signs that you've got a good leader in front of you?
Well, I think, it's someone that really, frequently some of the things I really look at are, do they really understand the problem they're solving? There's an old adage, I think it's, a problem well-defined is half solved. And it's not, and typically, when it's a very nuanced understanding of that problem, right down to the fact why, alternative solutions just haven't worked to date. What it is they're sort of, that they're building that clearly differentiates them. Like, I think, people naturally want to be part of a winning team, with a big mission behind them. And, the fact that you've got something, a product, an idea, a service, whatever it happens to be, that is clearly differentiated in the market, really gives people the kind of the confidence, I think, that, like, you're on the right track, you're solving the right problem, and you're doing it in a way that's different from the competition. So, you're not necessarily competing head to head on price or something, we're cheaper or something like that. They sort of develop a way to make it so they're really the only solution. Sometimes that can come from, defining their own category or, focusing on one particular area, one particular segment of customers that hasn't been well served to date. Those are some of the things we look at.
Yeah. So you're looking at someone that is knowledgeable enough, deep enough, curious enough, that is going and really understanding the problem better than anyone else.
That's right.
What type of person does that, right? Like, what type of person is the type that is going to go so deep that they're going to become the expert in the world of that problem? What does it take for someone to have that commitment to a problem? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think you used a great word, which is curiosity. I think that's always something kind of we're looking for, which is, because when somebody's naturally curious, it's not they just get an idea in their head and run with it. Along the way, we've seen multiple companies that have been successful that started with one idea, and when they really kind of got into the market, they realized there was an even bigger opportunity potentially in an adjacent space. And so somebody like that, that's like continually curious, constantly learning, and also at the same time just trying to improve themselves, I think is a big thing. If you're gonna ask a lot of your team, you've got to be willing to sort of demonstrate that that you're the type of person that continues to get better. As companies grow, the right leader for a team of 5 or 6 people versus the person that's the right leader for a team of 100 or 200 can be a very different person. And a lot of times, that requires sort of a leveling up of that CEO or founder and sort of their skill set that goes along behind it.
Let me ask you, have you ever had someone or a group of people pitch wonderful idea, wonderful project, but you look at the leader and say, we're not going to invest because of that person? And have you done the opposite, where you're like, maybe the idea is not the greatest, maybe the project's not the greatest, but I'm betting on the jockey?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen instances of both those cases for sure. Look, particularly at the early stage, the team is typically very small, and a lot of times they've got a big vision, they've got a big plan, some ambitious goals and things like that. And when you're sitting down and meeting with them, you're really looking at the guys that have to pull it off, right? So they've got to give you that confidence that like, hey, they can take this thing across the goal line. So, and we've also, and I would say that definitely, like, we've seen some things that like the product or the idea was sort of, was still kind of coming together, but man, just a great team, and there's a lot of confidence that they're gonna figure something out.
So a lot of it has to do with the people, the team. It just kind of reminds me of some of our old paradigms, of this high-powered individual that comes in and kind of pitches beautifully and, is a whiz and is powerful and strong, and they have all the answers and all, like they've got it all figured out. And that model of that leader is no longer the case, right? Now it's kind of like the opposite. We're looking for someone with humility. We're looking for someone that is going to take advantage of other people. Someone that's going to be, as we're talking about, curious. That's going to want to be an expert on something. How did you get to see some of that kind of like going from the Gordon Gekko of the 80s to what we're looking for now?
Sure. I mean, look, it's a lot of our founders are technical in nature, so for many of them, pitching is not their strong suit or even necessarily their comfort zone. So I think, yeah, somebody, the old Gordon Gekko style of leadership, or somebody that comes in and they've got it all figured out. Like I said, it's just not, that's not the type of person that's gonna be open to new ideas. It's not the type of person, it's the type of person that comes in and, day one, they've got it all figured out. And the one thing I can guarantee you is that day one, you don't have it all figured out. And even if you do have it figured out on day one, day two, everything could change. So, you need to be that type of person that's continually learning and is continuing to, evaluate new ideas, new opportunities, new threats, changing market conditions, what have you. We just had, obviously, we're kind of on the tail end, hopefully, of a global pandemic, and that was a difficult sea to navigate for a lot of the portfolio companies. At the beginning, it was very scary. We didn't, yes, some companies were lucky, and I think, and kind of caught an immediate tailwind. Others found themselves sort of in the midst of the storm, and it was, or it was a mixed bag. There were some pros and cons, and we were going to really have to see, just like wait until, everything was said and done before we could tally up whether it was a net positive or a net negative for the company. And that's, it's a difficult period for someone to navigate as a leader, for sure, and keep your team in place, make sure you've got the right strategy, you've got plenty of time to let this thing sort itself out, and also be open to new ideas and new opportunities that might present themselves in the midst of something like that.
So you're also saying, so you've got to be confident yet humble. You got to be curious. You got to be learning. You got to be growing, and you got to recognize that you're in a place with changing conditions, and everything is changing fast. And you kind of mentioned something here that at the end, which is you don't always have to answer and respond fast, right? You've got to understand what sort of situation you're in, and adjust and adapt your response based to that situation. Because sometimes people think that leadership is just about making quick decisions and moving forward. And your approach, or kind of what you said, is like, look, you gotta sometimes be patient and see how things are going to play out. Tell me a little bit more about that, right? That's not something you typically hear as a stereotype.
Yeah, look, I think it's it's a fine line, right? Like, obviously, everyday leaders are making decisions that affect the companies, affect the investors. So yeah, you don't want somebody that's just sort of shooting from the hip and making a bunch of snap decisions, right? But at the same time, you can't have somebody that's sitting there in the midst of something and needs to study it for 6 months until they're confident that they've got it all figured out. It's momentum and progress and things like that are important as well. And also, just like you said, things nowadays, especially in the tech world, they change really quickly. You may not think you have a single competitor, and you may look up in a few months and you've got a half a dozen that are very well funded and kind of attacking the same marketplace that you are. And so the ability to move quickly is certainly it not to be underrated. In fact, it's I still believe it's one of the startups' kind of greatest strengths, is the fact that they can make quick decisions. And usually the frustration of startups working with larger companies is, it takes forever for them to make a decision on anything. And but yeah, it's like I said, it's kind of it's a fine line for sure. But and you don't want to be too far on either side of it, I guess.
Yeah. That is a big question, right? Like, how do you know how long is long enough, right? How do you know when you're ready to make a decision, or where there's something more that needs to be studied? I'm curious about how you guys help, or what you ask, or for what you require for these leaders that you invest in their companies. Are you guys making sure that they're in some sort of like personal development, leadership development program, or that they're investing in themselves? Or is that kind of like, look, we're not going to invest in those people if they're not already doing that sort of stuff? What's your take, and what do you guys expect?
Yeah, look, I think absolutely. I mean, everything is sort of on a case by case basis, but certainly I think people that are investing in themselves, like we have a number of CEOs that are part of CEO groups or coaching groups, where they can get some peer feedback. I think it's important to have. It can be it's lonely at the top, and a lot of times, particularly when people are doing this for the first time, they're making decisions, but at the same time, they're sort of questioning whether they're heading down the right path. And so it's really nice to have some of those, YPO, EO, Vistage, there's a number of programs like that where they'll put you into sort of a peer group with other people that can, even give you some feedback about like when they faced a similar situation, because businesses can be very different in terms of what they do, but leadership is all about managing people. And I don't care how crazy technical your company is, or how not, technical, another company is. Like if you're dealing with a team of people, you're facing some of the same challenges. So I noticed the scaling up book in your background there.
Just a couple.
Yeah, just a couple. So we're, like big fans of those types of systems. Scaling up, traction from EOS is another good one. Just something that gives, especially a first-time founder, a little bit of a playbook in terms of like how to run and manage a company. And these are all, I think most of the recommendations in those books, like if you are really successful, you'll probably figure a lot of this stuff out, but like why not just adopt, a playbook that, I believe is like, if you aren't successful, it won't be because you chose the scaling up methodology versus the traction methodology. It will probably be because you screwed something up in the implementation along the way. And we see, just huge, these are simple processes and systems that can be put in place, I think, that really pay big dividends. And as far as like clarifying the vision and the mission of the company, clarifying goals, limiting the number of goals, making sure you don't have 25 goals for a year, because I can almost guarantee if you have 25 goals for a year, I can look through that list and pick out, 1, 2, or 3 that if you did those, 1, 2, or 3, it would be a great year for the company. And if you did 22, but you didn't do these 3, it would not be such a great year for the company. So it's sort of like really clarifying for everyone in the company, which only becomes more important as the companies get bigger. What is it that we're working on that's the most important thing for the company that's really going to move the needle, and sort of massing as much of the team's sort of time and resources and everything like that behind accomplishing those goals is just critical. And it just makes, it makes communication through the company when everybody knows like, hey, these are the top, 2 or 3 goals for the year. It helps them, I think individuals on sort of a daily basis kind of prioritize, like anyone, they probably got 25 things on their list of things to do. And it's nice if they can look through that list and say like, well, these 2 or 3 things are really sort of in line with like the big goals of the company for the year. So I'm going to focus on those. I'm going to start with those. And if I don't get to some of these other ones, maybe that's okay. But having kind of that clear focus that's easy to go, like that can kind of permeate the company, is critical, I think.
So thank you for those comments and that approach. I appreciate it. Obviously, that's kind of what I do.
Right.
But I like this idea that, look, you're working with smart people, but why don't you just do it faster and make your life easier, right? So what I tell a lot of capable CEOs and teams, I'm like, look, you guys could figure this out yourselves. No doubt about it. But do you want it to take 3 years or do you want it to take 1 year, right? And if you could get away from the ego side of, oh, we figured it out, versus it's already there and I don't have to reinvent it, I just have to use it well, it just helps speed things up. Same thing with peers, right? Where you're saying, there's no glory in being the smartest person in the room. There's glory in getting the outcomes. And if you have to ask for help, have support, it doesn't make you any worse or any weaker. It just makes you smarter because you get the outcomes. And I still sometimes see some of that mindset from, I don't want to say older generations, because I see it all around, where there's still a lot of kind of like stigma and value associated to, I figured it out, versus I just went down the easiest path and saved time.
Right.
So that kind of is your approach, because you're, at the end of the day, it's like, I don't care how we get there. We want to get there the best and most profitable way possible. So you're looking for people that have that kind of same mindset and are going to be stuck on the ego side of things. And what I'm also hearing is, and help me understand this. A lot of the people that you fund are highly technical, or not necessarily. Like they're highly technical and they need support on the management side of things, or some are strong in the management and they need some help on the technical. Is there like a mix? Is there something you're like, we prefer these over that?
I don't think I have a preference. It's very rare to find somebody that's strong in both categories.
Okay.
But I think us investing in technical companies sort of by default means that typically, or not typically maybe, but like I would say the majority of the time is that the founders are technical. They're solving a business problem that requires a technical solution, and they've got what I was talking about earlier with sort of like the nuanced understanding of the problem is that there's frequently other solutions out there that they believe haven't worked, and so to like really have that sort of understanding of what they want to build is really requires someone that has sort of a technical background. Now, not everybody does. We have other CEOs that have worked in industries and sort of identified problems from being on the inside, and maybe even went looking for a solution and to a problem and couldn't find one, or the solutions that they found weren't adequate, and so they decided to go create it, and then they brought in a technical team or co-founder or something like that to help them actually like realize that vision. But yeah, no, we like with most of our companies, at least in the early days, it's because you've got to go sort of build this technology, and then you've got to start selling it. Many of our companies are have sort of a SaaS business model or recurring revenue business model, which is a fabulous business model, and it's very powerful and sustainable. But in the early days, it can be a little slower to ramp, and so typically they're losing money for the first several years. And so if there is a problem that a solution can be found more quickly, when there's sort of a clock ticking in the background and there's dollars associated with that clock, the faster we can get up the learning curve and we can get this problem solved, the better.
So time is of the essence, and you want to ramp them up as fast as possible. So let's talk about leadership in a little bit of a broader sense, right? Because yes, many times we look at the CEO and they're like the leader of that organization, and you got to have a really good jockey kind of leading the rest of the team. But I am sure you're looking for leadership all around. What are some things that like what are some of your beliefs or your group's beliefs in terms of what leadership is or should be? What it is, what it isn't, what it stands for.
Yeah, I think like you've got to hire great people. You've got to give them sort of clear goals and objectives, and then you've got to get out of their way and let them do their job. And if you accomplish task one correctly, like they'll get it done. They'll find a way. Another reason why we're just fans of some of those systems we talked about earlier is that it's very the portfolio companies that sort of adopt those and internalize them. As an investor, as an outsider looking in, it's very easy to see what kind of progress they're making. There's sort of an inherent accountability when you go in there and you say, hey, our 3-year goal is we want to be doing 20 million in revenue, and our goal for this year is we want to do 4. Well, and then the goal for the quarter is we want to do 1. It's very easy to sort of like track progress and for people to hold themselves accountable.
So you mentioned accountability, and you mentioned hiring the right people. How much do you guys like get into the weeds in terms of how they hire or who they hire or what you're looking for in terms of best practices? Do you guys kind of guide them along, or do you like, hey, just go hire good people? Like what's your approach?
Yeah, I mean, this is again sort of a balancing act on our part that, we manage a large portfolio of companies, and so we need to be careful not to get too into the weeds of it. But I think that, most people's hiring processes, I think, regardless if it's one of our portfolio companies or really anyone, could probably be vastly improved, just in terms of, a clear understanding of like, what is the problem this person needs to be solving, or what jobs they need to be doing, having a clear description of it, having a bit of a repeatable process on the hiring front, to make sure that, you're evaluating candidates, you're comparing apples to apples in the sense of like, somebody didn't come in for 3 days of interviews and somebody had an hour-long conversation and got asked a completely different set of questions, or, the job description wasn't ready or something like that. So I think that there's a number of again, there's lots of processes and things like that out there that people can adopt, but having something that is repeatable, even just from the standpoint of like, if you think about it, like, if every hire is a bit of an experiment you're running to see if your hiring process is good, having a standardized process may lead you to some conclusions that maybe there's a problem with the process and it can be changed. But if everybody's, kind of going through a different process when they're being hired, if they're being asked completely different sets of questions, and you're getting kind of a mixed bag of results, like what, how do you interpret that, right? It's just, it could be very difficult. In some cases, for more senior hires, the companies will use recruiting firms that can kind of help bring a little bit more of a process to bear. But I think ultimately, if it's someone who's talking about like doing their own hiring, I think, finding a system, finding a process, reading, there's several good books. Who is one that comes to mind, and there's one that was written by them, blanking on the name now.
Top Grading?
But yes, Top Grading, which, look, and I would say that some of these processes, when you go in there and you look at them, these seem incredibly heavy. But, so is any hiring decision. Mistakes in that area are incredibly costly. So if you're looking at some of those systems and thinking, oh my gosh, like we don't have time to do all of that, I would probably really be questioning whether or not you're putting enough time into that process. It's something that, over time, like our portfolio founders, then even when they get like a great management team in place, hiring is something that they spend an incredible amount of time on, and it can be, everything from sort of filling open jobs or open recs, but even to right down to like building a bench of people that, maybe they're not ready to leave just now, or maybe the company's not at the right stage for them. Maybe they're too senior, and, you need the organization to be at another level before it really makes sense for them to come on board. And so, having that bench of people that you've been sort of developing over time, so when, either they're ready or the company's ready, you've got sort of a pool of candidates you can dip into.
Just a quick reminder for our audience, you can go to practicalleadership.com or practicaleadership.com. You can download a summary of today's conversation with Mike, and we're going to get you some of these resources that Mike has been referring to, Top Grading, Who, and we're hopefully going to get down to maybe some tools or specific activities that Mike likes to do with his team, and we're going to be sharing those with you guys as well. So make sure to visit the website so you can download some of these resources. Speaking just specifically about us, we really like Who as opposed to Top Grading. We believe Top Grading is great. The challenge with Top Grading is you've got to have some specialists in it, right? Like in your organization. So if you're moving up fast enough, you've got a recruiter internally. Getting them certified in Top Grading is definitely the way to go. Before you get to that, make sure you read the book Who and you follow that process. It's not as complex, and it's very systematic, and it leads to some amazing outcomes. Can't recommend it strongly enough. I think I got something out of your mindset and your approach, which is systems and processes as a way to improve, not just as a way of doing things consistently, but as a process of improvement. Is that how you've always thought about process or systems? Is that something you kind of discovered or learned about? Where does that kind of come from?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think again, it's having a repeatable process for just about any part of an organization, whether it's management, hiring. It really doesn't matter. I think if you can start with a process. I mean, I think there's just so many benefits to it. Like, number one, it forces you to sit down and think about the process, which in and of itself may be 50% of the benefit. And then also just, giving you sort of that repeatability of it, that to know that, like, hey, it's being executed in a consistent way every time. And, over time, those processes probably will change and probably need to change, but at least you've got sort of a consistent framework that you can start to modify. It's incredible, and also I think it's just easy. It's easier to communicate a process. It's easier to evaluate the results of a given process when that process is being conducted sort of in an identical fashion over a number of different, let's say, experiments. I don't know what to call them, but whatever it is you're trying to do.
Iterations and experiments.
Yeah.
So all that good stuff. So I think your approach is simple but profound, right? It's simple in the sense that just stop and think, right? Stop and think. I can't tell you how many businesses I have helped or been part of or know about where people are just running around doing stuff, right? And you would think that they can't get very far, but sometimes they get much further than you would imagine. But they're missing out on all the leverage that comes from these systems, all the waste that is generated by inefficiencies, and all the opportunities that are missed. So you said one of the most valuable things, I think, which is stop and think, right, and really understand what you're trying to accomplish. So develop the systems that are going to lead to consistency, which are going to lead to quality improvement, which are easier to communicate, which is another huge subject, right? When you're growing an organization, and every organization that you guys invest in is a fast-growing organization.
That's right.
The challenge of communication as the organization starts to grow and hire more people becomes, I don't like to use the term exponential very often, but I do believe it's exponential when it comes to contact points in communication in an organization. What is your take on that? How do leaders improve communication in an organization?
Well, I mean, I think it starts with having sort of a clear and consistent message to communicate, and I think that you said something that's maybe obvious, but potentially isn't for all the listeners, which is that we only invest in companies that have the potential for very high growth, and so I would say that getting some of these processes and procedures in place early. You may hear this as well, Max, that like, oh, we're only 8 people or 10 people. We don't really need a scaling up sort of implementation, or we don't have, we can all be in one room, and yeah, that's fine. But eventually, if you're successful, you may be 100 or 200. You may be in multiple offices, with this, sort of the rise of remote workers. I mean, you could have people all over the place. And so I think having sort of like frequent and consistent communication with everyone is just, only becomes more critical, because, if you're playing sort of the telephone game, the longer those lines extend, the more opportunity there are for sort of like misinterpretation of nah, that's not what I meant when I, when I said it. And I think, also just sort of like obviously there's some things that need to be shared on an individual level or just with the management team, but to the extent that all of that can be communicated to the whole company, to everyone, whether it's, whether the top 3 goals of the year have anything to, to do with their particular job function or not, just having everybody kind of understand like where this ship is heading, I think just really, really pays dividends and can really help just sort of like motivate people and get them excited about, a bigger vision as well as a plan for getting there, right? Which is, sometimes you may look out and say, well, we want to be a $1 billion company, and you're, 3 people in a garage. That may seem like a bit of a leap. But sort of dialing that back to like, well, we could get here in 3 years, and maybe that seems a little more achievable. We could get here in a year. Yeah, maybe that seems like a bit of a stretch, but doable. And we want to get here in a quarter. Well, yeah, we should be able to get there in a quarter. So I think it's it's not just about having a big vision, but I think it's a good leader has sort of like lays out a plan for like how we're all going to get there.
One of the things that I love about having the opportunity to talk to you guys, well, to you in this case, and to the organization that you lead, is it's just so inspiring to know that it is possible. And not only is it possible, but it is happening right now all around you. So, when somebody comes and presents an idea to you, you have no doubt that that if you guys decide to invest in it, it's going to grow significantly, and it's gonna have a major impact. And it's almost like a validation point for those entrepreneurs and those people that have an idea. Say, look, if they believe in it, it just, the level of certainty, I can just imagine going through the roof, right? Like believing that it is possible, and imagining beyond what you might have been able to imagine, and how you and your team can bring that to the people that are part of that. It just kind of stood out to me so much that I wanted to mention it. I'm going to go back to what you said. So clear messages, right? Like a clear message and clear messaging. You said something super powerful, which is know where you're going to be, not just where you are right now. So kind of recognizing the idea that you've got to behave like the company that you're going to become, not like the company that you are. So you can kind of stay ahead of the curve. So, yep, the system that you might have right now might be perfect for 10 people, but it won't scale to 100, it won't scale to 1,000. So you've got to behave to who you're aspiring to become, and not to who you are, and acting and thinking about that. I also like this idea, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners have sometimes an issue with this, which is communicating as much as possible with as many people as possible.
Yeah.
Right? There are some things that maybe are difficult for people to process, understand, digest. They might be misinterpreted, but I've never heard it said that way, and I really like the idea, as much as possible with as many people as possible. It'll give them confidence. It'll help them understand what role they play, how they participate in the outcomes, and I'm sure that it is inspiring for them as well. To know that there's that openness, that they are part of that inner circle of 1,000 people, right?
Yeah, right.
So
absolutely.
How did these ideas form in Mike Troy's world? Was it a you read something, you did something, you've been part of it, and you've seen, like, how does that mindset evolve? How did it get here?
Yeah, like a lot of trial and error, I think. For like many entrepreneurs, you figure out what works by first figuring out what doesn't work. And I think sort of from our standpoint, like some of the processes and things, we have a chance, managing a large portfolio of investments or companies. We get sort of a real-time view of, like, at any time there may be a half a dozen companies in the portfolio that are all trying to solve the same problem, and odds are we've seen this problem before. We've seen multiple attempts at different ways to solve it, and we have a good idea of like what's likely to work. You know, no guarantees, but yeah. And so I mean, even you know, from our standpoint, I think one of the reasons we're big fans of some of these processes that we've talked about is to know that like, you know, even within the portfolio, there's a consistent approach to, you know, whether it's hiring or management or annual planning or whatever. You know, if you're dealing with a handful of different processes, it's a lot easier to get your head around than if like everybody's sort of like making their own up on the fly.
So I like the thought. So one, trial and error, but I think one of the great advantages that you point out is something that I see myself, which is when you're learning from a bunch of different companies at the same time, right? The amount of information that you're able to kind of gather and expertise goes beyond what any one company can see, right? Because that one CEO is seeing things from his perspective, but you're looking at things from the perspective of 6 different people, 12 different people, 20 different people over a long period of time. That's a lot of insight that ends up falling on your lap. Even though you're in tech, there's a lot of different products and services that you're offering. So you're, you know, one of my favorite tech concepts, right? Cross-pollination, right? Cross-pollinating from one place to the other and kind of adding that value. And I think that's part of the value and the benefit of being able to see a lot of companies all around you, that you can have these very different perspectives and then bring them in. On the other hand, the idea of simplifying things. So if you're using some of the same systems, there's less complexity, and less complex systems tend to win. So I love that, but it ultimately comes from kind of trial and error.
Yeah, with a lot of independent data sets. So I mean, we become pretty good, you know, over time at like most people could at pattern matching, right? You know, of finding, you know, having somebody bring up a problem and sort of, you know, pattern matching that to, you know, maybe a similar problem from another portfolio company, and they recently solved it in you know, a pretty interesting way. And but yeah, that is, you know, it's one of our, you know, biggest advantages to the portfolio companies is that any of the company CEOs at any given time are, you know, 100% focused on growing just their own business, and so they just don't have the same sort of high level view that we do of you know, what's going on across multiple companies, and it's a, you know, it's a big advantage for sure.
Mike, is there any particular tool or framework or system that you're like, look, every entrepreneur needs to, every leader, not just entrepreneurs, and every leader needs to kind of use this thinking or this approach? It's been very helpful to you. Is it, you know, anywhere from how you run meetings, look at reports, talk to people? Is there like, hey, this is one of my go-to frameworks that you can kind of think about?
Well, we've talked about a couple already, which are definitely some of my go-to, you know, recommended frameworks for sure. And so if you haven't checked out some of the things like the scaling up or traction or who, you know, these are all things that people should be thinking about, I think. And you know, the other thing I'd just say is, you know, having like, this is sort of an interesting anecdote, but it's something you're asking, like, what are some of the, you know, consistent things you see in the successful companies? And like, I would say one of them is, you know, we receive a written, you know, whether it's monthly, sometimes it's quarterly report on the progress of the business. And it's you know, it's the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's not, you know, it's not all, hey, here are all the things that went right last quarter, but like even being just sort of like forcing that discipline. And like, if you're just getting started, I would totally recommend, you know, you know, lay out your own plan and write your own little monthly report to yourself. Just put it in writing, in terms of like, hey, what, you know, how last month or last quarter went, where are you relative to the goals that you set, what's the plan going forward. I think that's sort of like, that is a discipline that instills a level of accountability that is really important, because I think, big misconception for people is like, oh, if you're the boss or the CEO, you don't have anyone to answer to. And, it's quite the opposite. It's really, I think, the bigger the organization gets, like the more people you have to answer to. And so, you just have to get comfortable with that level of accountability. And if it has to start small, you got a small team of 2 or 3 people, like that is not a waste of time, I think, at all, to sort of like sit down, clarify, and put it in writing, what did you think you were going to do? What did you end up doing? How you're going to respond to that, or what the plan is for moving forward. And I think that, that sort of exercise could really pay dividends.
What a great concept. What a great idea. It's almost like your journal or your log. You're keeping track of yourself, even if you in fact don't have anyone else to report to, just knowing the flow of that information. Quick reminder to our audience, practicalleadership.com or practicaleadership.com. Download the summary of today's meeting, and hopefully I can convince Mike to share with us a template of what a good monthly report looks like. So instead of having to rack your brain and figuring out what constitutes a great report, Mike will help us out. I see you nodding, so thank you for that. And we're going to be able to give you kind of like a sample or a template where you can start using that. And whether you're reporting to someone else, or you're reporting to your team, or you just want to keep track of yourself, putting together this monthly report that can help you understand what's been going on in your world and how you've been evolving will give you a lot of substance to see the progress as well, I'm guessing, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Great. So Mike, thank you for that. I think one of our goals is to try to put something in our audience's hands that they can go and take and start doing right off the bat. You've actually given a lot of very solid ideas and a lot of solid things that they just need to go and do. And ultimately, the monthly report is something that they can definitely land on. There's a few things that I want to kind of recap of today's conversation. So if there's a few things that you mentioned, you want these leaders to bring in an inspiring vision and a confidence that it can be achieved, and that they're also confident enough that they can bring in people that are going to be smarter than them, and they won't have to be the smartest person in the room. That they can either bring in a strong team or add the talent that they need as they go along. They understand the problem better than anyone else, and they can articulate it better than anyone else, which kind of gives you an insight and an idea that this person is really an expert of what they are trying to solve, and that they have been diligent enough to really dive deep and dig deep in understanding what is going on. We talked a little bit about curiosity, and that you're looking for leaders that are learners and are always looking to grow. In the subject of hiring great people, you said, look, we got to hire great people, and you got to get out of the way and let them do their job. And we got to have accountability. They got to know what problem they are here to solve for the organization, which is a great concept that I think a lot of people think about. What is the candidate going to have to do, or even what goals they have to achieve? But I love the idea of posing it as, what is the problem that they are here to solve, which kind of gives you an even broader perspective of what they're doing. And you talked to us a little about this idea of systems, right? Systems bring simplicity, bring consistency. And to get to those, you got to start by just stopping and thinking about them and making sure that they become part of the tool to just simplify and improve consistently with what you're doing. And then ultimately, in the idea of leading others in the organization is have a clear message and communicate it consistently. Let as many people in, and I think we said something, communicate as much as possible with as many people as possible, and let them in, let them know what role they play and how they can contribute to the well-being of the organization. We also talked a little bit about this whole idea of scaling in terms of you can't be behaving like the company that you are. You have to behave like the company that you're going to become. So you've got to imagine where you're going and what it's going to take to be able to succeed at that level. So the systems, rhythms, communication that you have for your small organization will not allow you to get to become the organization that you want to be. And in your world, every company is a fast-growing company, so they got to behave like such. I know we covered a few more things, which I'm just going to touch real quick. You talked about peer groups and the value of peer groups. You talked about growth models, operating systems depend on the system that you're going to use. They call themselves differently, but the value of not having to relearn everything, use something that's been proven and that works, that you can just accelerate through by implementing something that's already there. And we arrived then at the monthly report as a tool of communication, accountability, and being able to see your progress. I know I missed lots of things. So Mike, kind of wrap in our journey to wrapping up, what is something that either we haven't had a chance to talk about or that I missed that you'd really like to emphasize and share with our audience?
I guess maybe just double underline the part about creating the business that you want it to become. It's very rare for any aspect of life for people. If you hear someone that's saying like, well, when I get a little more free time, I'm gonna start working out or getting in shape, or there's really no reason to put any of that stuff off. And I would say again, it's a consistent factor, whether it's part of the success or just sort of loosely correlated, I couldn't tell you, but the companies that go on to do very big things, from day one act differently. They act like a bigger company. They are a little bit more buttoned up. They just have their act together, on lots of fronts. And that doesn't mean that like there's not problems that they're working to solve, but they are, they're continuing to sort of like improve themselves, improve the company. Business a lot of times is, very rarely is it just, you come in for some big win and it's just all smooth sailing from that point on. It's a continuous problem solving exercise. And so I think that, the more people can kind of get comfortable with, there's a problem. Okay, well, there's a problem. There's probably a handful of solutions. So just get going on it. Is really just, I think, a healthier mindset to adopt, rather than one of maybe like, well, once we solve this one problem, that'll be it. There'll be no more problems going forward. No, it's a continual problem solving exercise. So the better you can get at identifying the problems, coming up with solutions, coming up with frameworks for evaluating those solutions, and being honest with yourself about what was the result, so that if you need to change tactics the next time around, you can do it. It's just so important.
Mike, thank you so much for that. I think in this last bit, you gave us enough meat for a whole other episode of practical leadership. We'll come back to you, and then we'll try to go in a little bit deeper on those, because those are all very powerful ideas that they have a lot of meat. And I'm sure the audience would love to learn about how you tackle those concepts. Mike, before we let you go, what's something exciting and fun that you're looking forward to here in the next few weeks or months?
Well, we've got a couple new investments that we're evaluating right now. That it's always exciting to sort of get started working with a new company that's got a tremendous amount of potential. And I think we've got some other companies that are really on track for doing big things this year. Very aggressive growth plans, and So we'll have our Q1 numbers coming out here soon. It'll be interesting to see how everybody's tracking against some of those aggressive goals. But I think there's never a dull day in my life. It feels like so. There's a lot of exciting stuff happening. We've got a large number of portfolio companies that continue to just work incredibly hard. Big teams that are driving towards ambitious goals, and it's just exciting to sort of track their progress, watch them mature, and hopefully we all get to a successful exit.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. We could sense that excitement and energy, and I want to thank you because you guys are the fuel that keeps our economy growing and pumping. These companies, these entrepreneurs, these ideas need guidance, need fuel, need cash to go where they're going. And without you guys, there would be so many lost opportunities. So I'm happy that you guys are catching on so many of those and ultimately contributing to the well-being of all of us here. Quick reminder for our audience: practicalleadership.com. Download the summary. Download the monthly report. Subscribe, share, all that good stuff. We're happy to have had you here today. Mike, thanks again so much for spending this, in our case, evening with us. Really appreciate it. It's been fun. It's been illuminating. So thank you for that. And we look forward to talking to you again sometime down the road.
Thanks, Max. I had a great time. Thanks for inviting me.
Goodbye for now. Thank you.